Have you ever seen someone sit in the same spot every morning, holding a letter, waiting for someone who never came back? This story will break your heart and heal it at the same time. It's about loss, redemption, and a promise that refused to die. If you've ever lost someone you still hope to see again, this is for you. Tell us where you're watching from, and let's begin. It was a quiet morning in Willow Creek, Oregon. The sun hadn't yet broken through the mist when Ethan Whitmore stepped onto the porch of his sprawling estate. The air smelled faintly of pine and wet earth. For most people, this place would have felt peaceful. But for Ethan, it was just another reminder of silence. Once, laughter had filled these halls. Now, it was only the hum of the wind through the willows. Ethan, a man in his early 50s, had everything money could buy but little left to live for. Years ago, he'd lost his wife in a car crash and his only daughter to leukemia. After that, he built walls higher than the fences that surrounded his home. Each morning, he walked through the garden out of habit, not joy tracing the same stone path he once used to walk with his little girl. But that morning, something unusual stopped him mid-stride. Beneath the old willow tree, the one that bent gracefully over the pond, a small figure sat quietly on the grass. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7. Her yellow dress was stained with dirt, and her bare feet were tucked under her legs. She clutched something in her hands, a folded piece of paper, holding it close, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Ethan froze. He wasn't used to seeing anyone on his property. It was fenced for nearly 2 acres, miles from the nearest road. Strangers didn't just wander in. Yet here she was, still and silent, her messy brown hair catching bits of sunlight through the fog. "Hey," he called softly. "Are you lost?" The girl looked up, startled. For a split second, her gray eyes met his, a mix of fear and something else he couldn't name. Then she jumped up and ran toward the trees at the edge of the property, disappearing into the woods without a sound. Ethan stood there for a long moment, unsure what had just happened. His heart beat faster than it had in years. She didn't look like a trespasser, more like a ghost out of a memory. Later that day, he asked his groundskeeper, Rick, if anyone else had seen her. Rick nodded slowly. "Couple of times, sir. Always early morning. Same dress, same spot. Runs off soon as you get close." That night, Ethan couldn't shake the image. The way she sat, the way she clutched that paper. He told himself it didn't matter. Just some neighborhood kid yet. Something about it felt heavier. Real. Almost familiar. The next morning, just after dawn, he looked out the window toward the willow. She was there again, sitting, waiting, like the day before. He stepped outside quietly, determined to reach her this time. The grass was damp under his shoes. When he got within 20 feet, she looked up again, those same gray eyes, and bolted. But in her rush, she dropped the folded paper she'd been holding. Ethan hesitated only a second before picking it up. The paper was old, creased, smudged with mud. But across the front, in faded blue ink, were the words, "One day I'll come back here for you. Wait for me." And underneath a name, Isabel Carter. Ethan read it again and again, his hands trembling slightly. That name. He had seen it before. Somewhere in the piles of hospital files he'd buried deep in his office. The breeze rustled the willow branches above him, as if whispering a secret he wasn't ready to hear. Who was Isabel Carter? And why did her letter end up in the hands of a child sitting beneath his tree? That night, sleep refused to come. Ethan Whitmore sat alone in his study. The letter spread open on his desk, beneath the glow of a single lamp. Outside, the Oregon rain drummed softly against the windows, a rhythm that made the house feel even emptier. He read the same line over and over again. "One day I'll come back here for you. Wait for me." Who was Isabel Carter? And why did those words feel so personal, so painfully close to something he had once lost? He opened drawer after drawer, pulling out old files, medical papers, and hospital bills from years ago. Among the faded folders was one labeled Portland Children's Hospital patient, Emily Whitmore, his daughter's name. His heart tightened. He flipped through page after page until a single signature caught his eye. Isabel Carter, RN. A chill ran through him. She had been one of the nurses during his daughter's final months. He remembered now, soft-spoken, gentle, always humming when she checked Emily's vitals. He hadn't thought of her in years. Could that same Isabel be connected to the little girl in his garden? The thought was absurd, yet impossible to ignore. The next morning, long before sunrise, Ethan was already standing by the window, staring out at the willow tree. Mist hung low over the pond, turning everything silver gray, and there she was again. The same small figure, knees pulled to her chest, head bowed over that invisible piece of paper she no longer held. Ethan stepped outside quietly, his breath visible in the cold air. He moved slower this time, careful not to startle her. When he was close enough to hear her small breaths, he spoke gently. "I found your letter yesterday," he said. "It's safe. You dropped it." The girl didn't move. Her tiny shoulders stiffened, but she didn't run. For the first time, she spoke, her voice trembling like the morning wind. "It's not mine. It's my mom's." "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "Lila," she whispered. "Lila Carter." The name hit him like a stone to the chest. Carter. The same as the signature. He crouched down, trying to catch her gaze. "Your mom, Isabel?" "Ah," Lila nodded. "She told me to wait here. Said she'd come back when it was safe." Ethan's throat tightened. The words on the letter suddenly carried weight beyond anything he had imagined. He wanted to ask more where she lived, who took care of her, but before he could, Lila's eyes widened. She backed away, then turned and ran once more into the woods. He didn't chase her. Instead, he stood in the cold, his heart pounding with questions. Back inside, he called Rick. "I need to know who owned this land before me," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. "Everything. Names, deeds, anything you can find." By afternoon, Rick brought an old file from the local records office. Ethan flipped through until he reached the property deed. The previous owners' names were printed clearly. The Carter family. He leaned back in his chair, stunned. The garden, his sanctuary of grief, had once belonged to her family. Isabel Carter's family. Rain began to fall again, harder this time, blurring the view of the willow tree outside his window. Somewhere in that storm, Ethan realized this was no coincidence. That letter wasn't lost, it had found its way back to where it belonged. And maybe, so had he. But one question kept echoing in his mind, louder with every roll of thunder outside. If Isabel Carter once lived here, where was she now? The following morning, the sky over Willow Creek cleared for the first time in days. The air was crisp, smelling faintly of rain and cedar. Ethan stood on the porch with a paper bag in hand, a simple peanut butter sandwich and a small apple juice box. It felt strange, preparing food for someone he didn't even know. But something deep inside told him Lila would come again. He waited near the willow tree, the same place where she always appeared. Around 7, a faint rustle in the bushes made him turn. There she was, cautious, barefoot, her yellow dress damp from the dew. She froze when she saw him, but this time, Ethan didn't move closer. He simply sat down on the grass a few yards away and placed the paper bag beside him. "It's just a sandwich," he said softly. "You don't have to talk. Just eat, if you're hungry." Lila hesitated, her small hands clutching the folds of her dress. After a long pause, she stepped forward, picked up the bag, and sat down across from him. The quiet between them was almost sacred. Two strangers bound by something neither could explain. She took a small bite, then another. still watching him with cautious eyes. Ethan waited, letting the silence stretch until she finally whispered, "You're not mad that I come here?" He shook his head. "No, sweetheart. You can come anytime you need to." She looked down at her sandwich. "Mom said this was our place. Before this house was here. We used to come every morning and sit under this tree. She told me if something bad ever happened, I should come back here and wait. She promised she'd find me again." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "And something bad did happen?" Lila nodded slowly. "One day, some men came. They took her away. Grandma said they were bad people, but Mom said they'd just help her get a new job. She never came home." Her small voice cracked on the last words. Ethan swallowed hard. "Do you still live with your grandmother?" "Oh. She nodded. "Just a few blocks away. But she's sick. Sometimes I come here while she sleeps. Mom told me this is where she'd look first." Ethan couldn't speak. The weight of her story pressed against his heart like a stone. He looked at the willow branches swaying above them, the same branches her mother must have known, the same ground her small feet had touched years before. He realized, for the first time, that this land, his land, had carried someone else's hope long before it carried his grief. "Lila," he said gently, "your mother, she didn't forget you. I promise you that." The girl looked up at him, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You think so?" "I know so," Ethan said quietly, "and I'll help you find her." Before she could answer, a voice called from beyond the fence, an older woman's, trembling but sharp. "Lila, where are you?" The little girl startled. "That's Grandma," she said, jumping to her feet. "She worries if I'm gone too long." Ethan nodded. "Go. I'll be here tomorrow." She hesitated, then gave a small nod and ran off toward the voice, disappearing through the trees. Ethan stood alone once more beneath the willow, the morning sun cutting through the branches like liquid gold. His eyes fell on the patch of soil where she'd been sitting, a single daisy pressed flat in the grass. He bent to pick it up, twirling it between his fingers. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted, an awakening he hadn't felt in years. He walked back to the house, with a single thought echoing in his mind. If Isabel Carter had once called this place home, perhaps the land itself still remembered her. And maybe, just maybe, it could help him find her again. By the time the next rainstorm rolled into Willow Creek, Ethan Whitmore had already made up his mind he wasn't going to let this mystery fade away. He couldn't. That night, he sat at his desk, surrounded by old land records and newspaper clippings. The steady sound of rain hitting the roof, matching the rhythm of his restless thoughts. He picked up the phone and called Detective Mark Heller, a name he hadn't spoken in years. They'd met long ago, during one of Ethan's foundation projects. A man known for taking cases that no one else dared to touch. "Heller," Ethan said, his voice firm but weary. "I need your help. It's about a woman who vanished years ago. Her name is Isabel Carter." By the following morning, Heller arrived at the Whitmore estate, trenchcoat damp, notepad in hand. "You sure about this?" he asked, scanning the letter that Ethan laid before him. "You're saying this was found with a little girl?" Ethan nodded. "Her name's Lila Carter, Isabel's daughter. She shows up here every morning. She's waiting for her mother, under that tree." Heller frowned. "You're saying the mother disappeared, and the daughter kept coming back to the same place? That's not coincidence. That's a message." They began digging into public records, following every trace of Isabel Carter's name. Hospital employment logs showed she'd once worked as a nurse in Portland, compassionate, reliable, no criminal record, no debt. Then, one entry changed everything. 6 years ago, Isabel had accepted a job offer through a private caregiving agency called Medcare Abroad. After that, her name vanished from every system. No tax records, no forwarding address, nothing. Heller leaned back, rubbing his chin. "This company, Medcare Abroad, they've been flagged before. promising women jobs overseas, then cutting contact once they leave the country. Could be trafficking. Could be forced labor. Ethan felt his blood run cold. You think she was taken? I think she never made it back, Heller replied quietly. But if she's still alive, we can find her. Over the next several days, Ethan and Heller worked tirelessly. They reached out to contacts in immigration services, NGOs, and hospitals across the border. Ethan used his influence to access information faster than the system usually allowed. Late one evening, Heller burst into the office holding a printed report. "We've got a hit," he said. Isabel Carter's name appeared on a list from a shelter near El Paso, Texas. A witness said she worked for a small caregiving facility, run off the books under a different name. Ethan stared at the paper, disbelief and relief clashing inside him. "She's alive?" "Could be," Heller said. "But the people running that place aren't exactly the charitable kind. We'll need proof before we move." Ethan walked to the window, staring at the willow tree glowing faintly under the garden lights. Lila's small shape had been there again that morning, sitting patiently as always. He could still hear her tiny voice echoing in his head. "Mom said she'd come back when it's safe." Safe. That word stuck with him. He turned back to Heller, resolve hardening in his chest. "Then let's make it safe for her to come home." The detective nodded, eyes sharp. "We'll find her, Whitmore. But when we do, you'd better be ready for what you find." Ethan exhaled slowly, glancing once more toward the willow tree outside. The wind picked up, bending its branches as if whispering something urgent. In that quiet, one thought settled deep in his mind. A question that wouldn't let him rest. What if Isabel Carter hadn't just vanished, but had been calling for help all along? Ethan Whitmore arrived in El Paso just before dawn. The desert sky was still dark, painted in muted blues and purples. He could feel the dry wind cutting against his face as he stepped out of the airport, so different from the damp chill of Oregon, yet the heaviness in his chest felt the same. Somewhere in this city, maybe only a few miles away, was the woman whose promise had kept a little girl waiting for years under a willow tree. Detective Heller met him outside a small diner near the state line. "You look like hell," Heller muttered, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were photos, a cluster of worn-down houses, bars on the windows, and women standing outside in faded uniforms. "That's the place. Locals call it Casa del Sol. It's supposed to be a caregiving home for the elderly, but it's really a holding site for exploited workers." Ethan studied the photos, his jaw tightening. "She's there?" Heller nodded. "Our contact inside saw her 2 nights ago. Thin, bruised, but alive. Goes by Isabel M. They took her passport, her phone, everything. She's been there at least 6 years." Ethan leaned back, struggling to catch his breath. He'd imagined finding her, but hearing she was real breathing, trapped, made it painfully real. "What do we need to do?" Heller glanced around, before lowering his voice. "FBI's involved, but we can't go public yet. We're planning a raid at dawn tomorrow. It needs to look routine. If they get tipped off, she'll vanish again." Ethan hesitated. "I want to be there." "Not a chance," Heller said. "You're not trained for this." But Ethan's tone hardened. "You said this started because of me, because I found that letter. If I don't see this through, I'll never forgive myself." The detective studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine. You stay back with the vehicles. When it's done, I'll bring her to you." The next morning, the desert was still and silent as the convoy approached Casa del Sol. The sky was pale, pink, the air cold enough to sting. Ethan waited behind a black SUV, hands trembling slightly despite the heat. Through binoculars, he could see shadows moving inside, the crumbling building, women waking, preparing for another long day of servitude. Then, at 6:03 a.m., the call came through Heller's radio. "Go." Agents in plain clothes poured through the front gate. Shouts echoed. Doors slammed. The scene erupted into chaos. Ethan gripped the SUV door, his heart racing. He could hear muffled screams, the crack of boots on concrete, and then silence. A few minutes later, Heller emerged, guiding a woman wrapped in a thin gray blanket. Her hair was longer now, streaked with gray, but Ethan recognized her instantly. Isabel Carter. She looked dazed, her eyes darting, until they found him standing by the car. Heller whispered something to her and stepped aside. Isabel took a slow step forward, then another, tears already forming. You came for me?" she asked, her voice raw. Ethan swallowed hard. "No," he said softly. "Your daughter did. I just followed her faith." Her knees buckled. Heller caught her before she fell. Isabel buried her face in her hands, sobbing, repeating her daughter's name, Lila. "Lila. My baby Lila." Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the folded, dirt-stained letter, the same one Lila had once held under the willow. He pressed it into Isabel's trembling hands. "She still has faith in you," he whispered. "She never stopped waiting." Isabel clutched the paper to her chest as if it were life itself. "Then please," she said, barely above a whisper, "take me home." The desert wind howled softly through the open plain. As the agents loaded the rescued women into vans, Ethan looked east toward the rising sun golden light spilling across the sand. It felt like the beginning of something sacred, something that finally made sense. He turned to Heller. "Book us the next flight to Portland," he said quietly. "A little girl's been waiting long enough." But Heller didn't move. His radio crackled again, the signal weak. He frowned, lifting it to his ear. "Say that again," Static hissed. Then a voice came through, urgent, shaking. "We've got a problem. One of the men escaped. He knows where they're headed." Ethan's heart stopped. "Whitmore," Heller said, his expression darkening. "You might not be the only one going home." The flight back to Oregon felt endless. Isabel sat beside Ethan in silence, staring out the window as the plane cut through clouds. Her hands still trembled, clutching the same folded letter, worn and fragile like the years she had lost. Every now and then, she whispered her daughter's name, almost as if to remind herself it was real that she was finally going home. Ethan didn't speak much either. He kept glancing at her, trying to imagine what 6 years in captivity had done to a woman who once radiated light. Her face was thin, her eyes tired, but alive. There was still strength there, a quiet defiance that hadn't been broken, only buried. When they landed in Portland, Detective Heller met them at the terminal. He looked tense, his phone pressed to his ear. "The FBI's tracking the man who escaped," he said quickly. "Name's Javier Ramos, one of the recruiters. We think he's heading north. You two need to stay low until we confirm he's in custody." Ethan frowned. He wouldn't know about Lila. Heller's eyes hardened. "Don't be sure. Those people keep records, addresses, relatives, photos. If he knows Isabel has a daughter, he'll use that to scare her back into silence." Isabel's face went pale. "No," she whispered. "He can't find her. He can't." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "He won't," he said firmly. "I'll make sure of that." They drove for hours through gray rain and winding roads until the familiar gates of Willow Creek appeared. The mansion looked different now, no longer a symbol of solitude, but of something waiting to be healed. Isabel's breath caught as she stepped out of the car. Her eyes went straight to the willow tree swaying in the distance. "She still comes here?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Every morning." They walked quietly through the damp grass, their shoes sinking into the soft earth. The air smelled like rain and soil pure, heavy with memories. Then, through the mist, they saw her. Lila sat under the tree, just as she always had, yellow dress now faded to pale cream, a small daisy crown resting crookedly on her hair. She looked up as they approached. For a heartbeat, her eyes widened confusion, disbelief, then something brighter. "Mom," she whispered. Isabel froze, tears spilling down her cheeks. Her voice broke. "It's me, baby." Lila dropped the flower she was holding and ran faster than Ethan had ever seen her move. Isabel fell to her knees as her daughter crashed into her arms, both of them sobbing, holding on as if afraid the world might pull them apart again. Ethan turned away, his throat tightening, giving them space. The sound of their crying raw, unguarded, was more powerful than any words. The years of pain, the waiting, the silence, all shattered in that single embrace. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt peace begin to settle over the garden. The wind rustled softly through the willow leaves, carrying away the echoes of loneliness that had haunted the place for too long. But as he looked toward the distant road, his peace faltered. A black pickup truck slowed briefly at the gate before driving off. Ethan's gaze followed it, until it vanished into the rain. He didn't say anything, not yet. But deep inside, he knew this wasn't over. That night, the rain didn't stop. It came down in steady sheets, drumming against the windows of the Whitmore mansion, like a warning that refused to be ignored. Ethan barely slept. He kept checking the security cameras, scanning the long driveway that led through the pines. The black pickup truck he'd seen earlier haunted his mind. Down the hall, Isabel slept in the guest room with Lila curled up beside her. The sight of them reunited should have brought peace. But Ethan couldn't shake the gnawing tension in his chest. After everything they'd endured, after years of loss and fear, could the past really just let go so easily? By morning, the storm had turned the property into a blur of mist and puddles. Ethan brewed coffee in the quiet kitchen, listening for the smallest sound. When he looked out the window, his breath caught. Tire tracks, fresh ones, cut through the wet dirt road beyond the gate. He grabbed his coat, stepped into the rain, and followed them out toward the fence line. They led to a break in the trees, then disappeared. Someone had been there. And not long ago. When he returned inside, Isabel was awake, holding her daughter close. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I saw headlights last night, near the road." He nodded. "I saw them too." Before he could say more, his phone buzzed. Detective Heller's voice came through, grim and direct. "We've got confirmation. The man who escaped Javier Ramos crossed into Oregon. We lost track of his vehicle about 10 miles from you." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Then he's close." "Too close," Heller said. "Lock the doors. Keep them inside." "I'm on my way." Ethan hung up, jaw tightening. He checked the locks, the windows, every corner of the house. But the mansion suddenly felt too large, too open. The weight of silence pressed down until even the creak of the floorboards felt like a threat. Lila sat on the couch clutching her letter, watching him with wide eyes. "Mr. Ethan," she asked softly, "is someone coming to hurt us?" He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Not while I'm here, sweetheart." Isabel took Lila's hand and whispered, "Go upstairs, honey. Stay in my room." Once the girl was gone, Isabel turned to Ethan. "You shouldn't have brought me here. He'll come for me, not you." Ethan shook his head. "He'll have to get through me first." Thunder rolled in the distance, followed by the faint sound of gravel shifting outside. Ethan moved toward the window. Headlights. A car was pulling up slowly to the gate. No police lights. No markings. "Stay here," he said, grabbing the pistol from the locked drawer beneath the stairs. He hadn't fired it in years, but his hands were steady now. Rain poured harder as he stepped onto the porch. Through the blur of water and fog, a figure emerged tall, wearing a dark jacket, moving with intent. "Ethan Whitmore?" a voice called out. Ethan raised the gun, his voice calm but firm. "That depends who's asking." The figure stepped closer, enough for Ethan to see his face. Under the lightning flash, Javier Ramos. He smiled faintly, cruelly. "You shouldn't have gotten involved, old man. She belongs to us." Ethan's grip tightened on the gun. Not anymore. Ramos tilted his head. You think you can protect them? People like you always think money makes you untouchable. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the two men facing each other in the rain, one desperate to reclaim control, the other finally finding something worth defending. Ethan didn't move. Leave now, he said quietly, and I'll let the law deal with you. Ramos took another step forward, eyes burning. And if I don't? Before Ethan could answer, a small voice echoed from the doorway behind him. Mom? Lila. Ethan turned his head for only a second, and that was all Ramos needed. A loud crack cut through the storm. Then, silence. The gunshot echoed through the rain like a lightning strike that refused to fade. Lila screamed. Isabel ran to the doorway, her hands trembling, as she saw Ethan stumble backward, clutching his shoulder. Blood mixed with rain, dripping onto the porch steps. Ethan! She cried, rushing to him. He waved her back, gritting his teeth through the pain. Stay inside. Lock the door. Ramos stepped closer, raising his weapon again, a twisted grin on his face. You should have stayed out of it, Whitmore. People like her never change their fate. But Isabel wasn't the same woman who had once been taken. She had lived through years of fear, silence, and captivity, and she wasn't about to lose her second chance. In one motion, she grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace beside the door and stepped out into the rain. Then maybe it's time we change it ourselves, she said, her voice trembling but strong. Ramos turned just as she swung. The poker struck his wrist, sending the gun flying into the mud. He lunged forward, grabbing her by the arm, but Ethan was already moving, pushing through the pain, tackling him hard into the wet gravel. They struggled. Fists, mud, and fury. Thunder rolled above them, as if the whole sky was watching. Ramos managed to pin Ethan down, pressing his forearm across his throat. You think you can save them? He hissed. You think people like us just disappear? Ethan choked out through clenched teeth. No, you do. With one last surge of strength, he twisted Ramos's arm, forcing him off balance. Isabel kicked the gun toward him. Ethan caught it and aimed without hesitation. It's over, he said. For the first time, Ramos's expression shifted from arrogance to fear. The sound of sirens began to rise in the distance, Heller's car lights cutting through the rain as they approached. Ramos tried to run, but before he could reach the fence, Heller's voice thundered through the storm. Federal agents! Drop it! Ramos froze, raising his hands, surrounded within seconds. The tension broke all at once. Ethan lowered the gun, every muscle trembling. Isabel rushed to his side, pressing her hand against his wound. You're going to be okay, she whispered. He gave a weak smile. Guess I wasn't built for action scenes anymore. Heller jogged up, shaking his head. You're lucky I got here when I did. Another 30 seconds, and he'd have been gone. Ethan glanced toward the willow tree, swaying in the wind, rain glinting off its leaves like tears. He wasn't the only one who needed saving. By the time the ambulance arrived, the storm had finally begun to ease. Lila clung to Isabel's arm, refusing to let go. As medics bandaged Ethan's shoulder, the little girl stepped forward and placed her small hand over his. You saved us, she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly, his eyes wet. No, sweetheart. You saved me first. In the following days, the police investigation dismantled the trafficking network that had stolen so many lives. Javier Ramos was charged and sentenced within months. Isabel testified in court, her voice steady, her courage unshakable. When it was all over, life at the Whitmore estate began to change. The mansion, once a place of mourning, now echoed with laughter. Isabel and Lila moved in permanently, and the house felt alive again, not with ghosts of the past, but with the warmth of family. Each morning, Ethan still walked through the garden, but now he wasn't alone. Lila ran ahead of him, her shoes splashing in puddles, her laughter ringing through the air. Isabel often joined, her hand slipping naturally into his as they watched their daughter play beneath the willow tree. One afternoon, as the sun broke through the clouds, Lila sat on the grass holding a blank sheet of paper. "Mom," she said, "can I write my own letter?" Isabel smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. What will it say?" Lila grinned, scribbling with her pink crayon. "One day, I'll come back here for you. Wait for me." She looked up and added, "Just in case." Ethan laughed, kneeling beside her. "Then I guess we'll always have someone to wait for." The willow branches swayed gently above them, no longer heavy with sorrow, but whispering with life and second chances. And for the first time in years, Ethan Whitmore finally felt what he had thought impossible: home. This story reminds us that even in the darkest seasons of life, hope has a way of finding its way back, often through the most unexpected people. It teaches that healing doesn't come from forgetting the past, but from facing it with courage, compassion, and the willingness to care again. Ethan's transformation from grief to love mirrors what many of us forget: that one act of kindness, one moment of faith, can rebuild an entire life. Isabel's strength shows that survival is not the end of the story, but the beginning of reclaiming one's humanity. And little Lila, with her unwavering belief in a simple promise, embodies the purest form of hope, the kind that refuses to die. In the end, the story reminds us that family isn't always defined by blood, but by those who choose to stay, to fight, and to love without condition.